Welcome to our introductory lesson on the basic structure of a cell. So how do we even figure out that living things are made up of cells? Microscopes were around for quite a while, but they were considered a novelty item, a fun thing to look at insects with, because insects look really scary close up. It wasn't until later, in 1665, that a man by the name of Robert Hooke used a microscope to look at a thin slice of cork. This is cork. It might be familiar to you. It's inside of wine bottles. It actually comes from the cork oak, which is a tree. And he took a thin slice, looked at it under the microscope, and this is what he saw. This is his sketch. They looked like little boxes under the microscope next to each other. It's pretty similar to what you saw when we looked at the onion skin under the microscope, these boxes next to each other. And these boxes reminded him of cells because they looked like the small rooms monks live in, which were also called cells. So this is a monk's cell. It's like a box. There's nothing in it but a cross, a bed, a place to pray, and every single cell kind of looks the same. It's like a box next to each other. So that's why Robert Hooke used the word cell, and it stuck. By the way, there's no actual picture of Robert Hooke. We don't have a portrait of him. And rumor has it that because he had a feud with Sir Isaac Newton, what happened was they were rivals, and when Hooke died, Newton had his portrait removed or destroyed, and there's no surviving portrait right now. So scientists, sometimes they can be very competitive and vicious. Robert Hooke was quite a genius. He actually discovered the Hooke's law in physics, so he was an important person that didn't get as much credit maybe posthumously as he deserved. Another scientist that contributed was Anton van Leeuwenhoek. And he decided to take pond water and look at it under the microscope. And he saw these tiny little microscopic organisms swimming around. Part of the reason why we treat our water to make sure we don't consume these things because they can make us sick. And then in 1838, quite a while later, we started to see something known as the cell theory take shape. And this scientist over here, Matthias Schleiden, was a botanist. He studied plants for his whole entire life, and he concluded that all plants are made up of cells. He is one of the co-founders of the cell theory. Here is another. This is Theodor Schwann, and he was a zoologist. He studied animals, and he concluded that all animals are made of cells, so he is another co-founder of cell theory. The missing piece came from this man, Rudolf Virchow, and he actually looked at cells under the microscope and saw them divide. So he concluded that cells come from other cells. Before that, there were ideas floating around that cells can just pop into existence spontaneously, and this man said that's not the case, no way, and we came up with the cell theory, which states all living things are made of cells, plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, all made out of cells. They're the basic unit of structure and function. You can't get smaller and still have a working living thing. And cells come from the reproduction of existing cells. They don't just pop into existence. They come from other cells. Okay, what is true about all cells? First, they have a cell membrane, which is like a skin for the cell. We've already looked at the cell membrane when we talked about phospholipids, and we said the cell membrane is made up of lipids. That's the skin. It controls what comes in and out. The second part that's really important in all cells is the cytoplasm, which kind of fills up the inside of the cell. It's this fluid. And then you have something known as ribosomes. Ribosomes make proteins. We know how proteins are really important. They're messengers. They help us fight disease. They have a lot of different functions, and they're made in the ribosome. So every single cell has to have them. And the last part, all cells have DNA. They have some genetic material. So here are the two main types of cells. We have eukaryotic and prokaryotic, and you can see them, their sizes compared. So eukaryotic cells are much bigger, they're more complicated, and prokaryotic cells are smaller and simpler, and they include bacteria. So let's take a look at each of those. So first we have prokaryotes. These organisms don't have a nucleus. They also lack membrane-bound organelles like mitochondria and chloroplasts. They're very simple. They don't have a nucleus. They just have their DNA in the cell. They have a single circular chromosome, which I'll show you. And these are the first life forms, right? At the beginning of the history of life, these were the first organisms. They're also all unicellular, made up of one cell. Now, here is a nice picture of a prokaryote. Here you can see there's no nucleus. The DNA is here just as one chromosome. This area of the cell is called the nucleoid, but it doesn't have any type of outer membrane like the nucleus does. It also has a cell membrane because all cells do, and it has a cell wall as well. And that cell wall is made of peptidoglycan. Okay. Other things it has are these ribosomes, which are the protein factor, and we said all cells have them. So these are prokaryotes, small, simple, no nucleus. The next type is the eukaryotes, and these have a nucleus, and they have lots of organelles that are membrane bound, and they have all their little jobs that they do. Eukaryotes include protists, fungi, plants, and animals, all these kingdoms over here. They are more complex, and they can be multicellular like we are, or they could be unicellular like an amoeba in pond water. Here are the main features of eukaryotic cells. They have a nucleus, which is where the DNA is contained. They have the cytoplasm, which of course all cells have, even prokaryotes, but their cytoplasm is filled with all of these organelles. There's the mitochondria we learned about. We're going to learn about a couple more as well. There's also a cell membrane for every eukaryotic cell. Here are two important types of eukaryotic cells. We have our animal cell and our plant cell pictured here, and you saw them under the microscope when you looked at the cheek cell, which was an animal cell, and the plant cell, which is we looked at onion skin. So they have some differences between them. They have some different structures, and we're going to take a look at some of those, right? So here's your animal cell, and some things that are unique to the animal cells. They tend to have more of an irregular shape than a plant cell, which has a more rigid cellular shape. They also have these things known as centrioles, which help in cell division. They also have lysosomes, which help break things apart, not really pictured here. And when we take a look at our plant cells, we see things that plants have that animal cells don't. So not only do they have a cell membrane on the inside, they also have this thing known as a cell wall, which is made up of cellulose and gives the plant protection and a rigid kind of brick-like structure. You have a big vacuole in the middle. You have these green things known as chloroplasts where photosynthesis happens. So there are important differences between plant and animal cells, differences that you were able to see for yourself under the microscope. So here's the scale of these, right? We have our eukaryotes here, plant and animal cells, and you can see that they are bigger than our prokaryotic cells, which are bacteria. So just to get a scale of how this is, I want to show you something pretty cool. And you can see how small these things really are. Let me just slide it over. So this is a pretty cool program, and it allows you to kind of zoom out and zoom into the universe and get infinitely smaller. So we're zooming into things that are smaller and smaller and smaller. We're looking at things that are small. There's Italy, Grand Canyon. We're pretty far from the size of a cell yet, but we're going to get there. It's really cool. You can Google scale of the universe and open it. Now we have some living things, the blue whale. We can go in further. We have the elephant. There's a human being, and when we zoom in further, we have a little hummingbird, and we're going in smaller, the penny, smaller and smaller, we have ants. And here we're at like the amoeba, which is a pretty large unicellular organism. We have a paramecium, also in pond water, and we start to go in more and more, and here we have the cell. We have a skin cell right here. We have a tiny little red blood cell. And we keep going in further and further. We have E. coli bacteria. Okay, we go even smaller and smaller, and we start to see things that are now not visible with a light microscope. This is the virus that causes HIV. This is HIV virus. This is hepatitis B. You can see those are really small, and we get to the point where we're looking at DNA. And we can keep going and following this, going smaller and smaller down to atoms and subatomic particles, but we're going to stop right here. Actually, I need to turn that music off. Okay, so cells, why are they so small? Why can't they get larger? And the issue is as the cell grows, its volume increases very fast, faster than its surface area, and waste and nutrients have to move farther and farther to reach their destination, which is a problem because waste can build up and the cell can run out of nutrients. So a cell size is limited by its surface area to volume ratio. You can see right here that as something gets larger, its volume increases faster than the outer surface. Okay, so cells are also adapted to have shapes to minimize, or to maximize rather, their surface area so they can exchange materials. Skin cells, for example, can be broad and flat. Nerve cells can be really, really long to maximize their surface area. But at some point, cells get too big. And when cells are too big, they split and they divide. And then that's the way organisms grow. So, for example, you have this newborn, and you have the newborn and his father. And the father is very large compared to the newborn. And the newborn isn't going to get bigger cells. His cells are the same size as his father's cells. But the newborn is going to get more and more cells until he becomes an adult like his father. So organisms get larger by increasing cell number, not size. All right, so the last thing we want to look at is cell specialization. Cells are different from each other, and their structure determines their function. So red blood cell is very different from here, like a nerve cell, for example. And if you go back in your life history, at one point you were just one cell called a zygote. And that zygote started to split, go through cell division, and make more cells. And those cells did something known as differentiation. What happened is they used specific parts of your DNA to make the cells specialized, to have special shapes, special structures, to do special jobs. So your cells, your stem cells, they're known as your early cells, specialized. They differentiated into nerve cells, for example, and smooth muscle cells, and blood cells, and bone cells. And that is known as differentiation. Here is an example of our skin cells, right? And you can see they're specialized to do their function. Red blood cells and white blood cells, right? They're nice and smooth so they don't get clogged and caught anywhere. Here are sperm cells with the head and the tail. They're specialized to be able to swim. You have finally this is bone tissue, and your bone cells are surrounded by an extracellular calcium matrix, and these cells are specialized to give you that structure and support that you need. So I hope this was a helpful introduction to cells.